Welcome to the podcast LGBTQ Plus Insights, and in today's episode, we will be discussing the thrilling topics of advocacy and allyship, specifically how advocacy operates in regard to the trans community, and a special focus on how allyship operates in regard to advocacy. We will dive into what advocacy is, how it aids the trans community, yet how it can also not always be the most helpful way to support or make change. With the help of scholarly articles and first-hand accounts, this episode will hopefully spread more knowledge about what advocacy really looks like. Well, what is advocacy? Advocacy is the act of voicing concerns, opinions, and spreading awareness about a certain cause. Quote, advocacy often refers to formal or informal efforts to speak, write, or argue on behalf of a group, person, or cause. However, there are boundaries, rules, and precautions that need to be taken to ensure it is gone about in the most respectful way and no unintentional harm is caused. These precautions can look like 1. Not overpowering trans voices. It is important to allow the people that are a part of the community that is being advocated for to speak for themselves. We do not want to come off as tone deaf or overstep the role of an ally. 2. You cannot advocate for some people in a certain community without advocating for others. For example, you cannot advocate for certain members of the trans community without advocating for everyone else in the community. Advocacy is to benefit everyone the cause at hand supports, not only select people. A great example of this is derived from Morgan Page's One from the Vault's Gossip, Access, and Trans History Telling. Quote, one of the big problems with writing and talking about history is that history has a reputation for being boring. When I was in school, history class entailed memorizing a dry list of dates and events that advanced a narrative of white settler quote-unquote progress. What I now know is colonization, and didn't have room for women, people of color, or sexual and gender variance. Here, Page shows that when society does not advocate or speak up for certain individuals, we ultimately become undereducated and discriminatory. Whether this discrimination is intentional or not, it still operates in an exclusionary way. As the author points out, she later came to learn that these are the effects of colonial narratives, and what she was learning in school was a white-centric history. Relating back to trans advocacy, that is what is crucial that everyone is advocated for. When people get excluded, discriminated, and pushed out of the narrative, it does not lead to change, it actually serves as a temporary band-aid. Well, yes, it may provide change for some people, however, the end goal of change should be all-encompassing and cannot do that if people are being excluded from the narrative. 3. Respecting boundaries. This precaution goes in hand with the first example because as an ally, it is crucial to listen. A major part of advocacy also stems from inclusivity and accessibility. Accessibility does not always have to be a physical idea. It can also refer to a verbal accessibility. As seen in the article, Trans Activism and Advocacy Amongst Transgender Students in Higher Education by Abby Goldberg and others, there is a barrier that prevents trans people from speaking out. Quote, trans students who engage in activism, for example, regarding the need for gender-inclusive restrooms, housing, or name or gender change options, face many barriers. These can include entrenched stereotypes and lack of awareness, resistance to policy changes by dominant group members, and the invisibility of trans people on campus. Exposure to or anticipation of such barriers may discourage trans students from engaging in activism, particularly actions aimed at transforming climate or policy. Furthering this, when advocating or practicing being an ally, there needs to be a verbal accessibility for trans individuals to discuss their feelings in order to take down the barriers that may be discouraging them to do so. A real-world or current example of this is Alberta's Education Amendment Act, or Bill 27. Currently in Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith and the Albertan government are working to amend 3 crucial laws that protect trans rights. The CBC article states that this act is highly confidential and requires the utmost discrepancy. Quote, this legislative initiative is highly sensitive and should be approached with the utmost confidentiality. With this, we will explore why advocacy could be a good form of action and why it could hold some negative outcomes regarding this scenario. This specific act of revoking trans rights by passing bills to remove those rights is described as discreet. This means that the government is attempting to swiftly pass these bills and legislations without any uproar, and along with this, 2 LGBTQ+ support groups are actively working towards standing up against the Albertan government. Quote, 2 LGBTQ+ advocacy groups, eGale and Skipping Stone, are challenging in the court the school pronoun laws and rules that would limit healthcare for transgender youth, calling them discriminatory. Here, planned or prolonged advocacy is a really good form of resistance. We can infer this because the trans community is saying that advocacy will happen. However, for the time being, they need people not to discuss it in order for change to function at its full effect. Additionally, advocacy in the future, on the set date that it has been appointed by resistance organizers, is very crucial to the cause. It is not a good form of resistance right now. More so, advocacy is more calculated than that and needs to be in practice in this scenario. I understand that there's an urge to enact change right away, yet sometimes that can be counterintuitive. Especially in this situation, extra precaution needs to be taken when advocating, because if there is word of protest circulating, the government can find out. The damage this causes is that the government could take counteractive measures such as in place more right-revoking bills or add reinforcements to government institutions to stop groups from spreading awareness. The outcome of this could be that advocacy groups' plan for going to court could also be ruined, thus halting the progress that could be made otherwise. Regarding these legislations forcing pronoun control, which means that if a child in school uses different pronouns other than those assigned at birth, the parents have to be notified. The restriction of gender-affirming care, and so much more, we need advocacy more than ever. This is because the medicalization of trans children is dehumanizing and untrue. As made apparent in Claudia Castaneda's article, Childhood, the discourse surrounding trans children's bodies is inappropriate and only pertains to trans children and not cis children. Additionally, in Dueling Dualisms by Anne Foster Sterling, we also see how the entitlement and invasion of trans bodies operates. Through the issues in Alberta right now and in these articles, we can see how trans bodies are being invaded and exploited. This proves that this is a discriminatory act because these measures of anti-legislations, pronoun control, and the policing of bodies or anatomy is not present in cis people's lives, thus showing the targeted acts that occur in trans people's lives every day. Why does thoughtful advocacy matter, and how can you be an ally? As an ally, a space where trans people are comfortable being themselves needs to be curated. Additionally, we do not want to get ahead of ourselves and ignore trans voices, wants, and needs. It is the role of the ally to be there to support, not to overpower. Using the 3 tips for advocacy that were discussed in the beginning of the podcast is an awesome way to navigate allyship. It is also important to draw upon the second tip for allyship as it provides more context and educational foundation. Without being well versed on issues and concerns regarding the group you are advocating for, not only can you inherit and spread misinformation, but this misinformation can unintentionally harm said community. As seen in Tay Meadows' article, Child, advocacy can be used against the community. Visibility is sometimes a negative thing. Visibility can slow the trajectory of trans progression, as stated in the article. Quote, older transgender adults initially resisted the efforts of parent activists and advocates who first began gating for support from schools and doctors in the late 1990s and early 2000s, fearing political repercussions from the public endorsement of social transition for young children. Here, advocacy can sometimes draw unwanted attention to a community, thus potentially drawing more attention to trans people's hardships. Unfortunately, this can cause trans bodies to be further policed and more anti-trans rights laws to be in place, as we uncovered earlier in the episode discussing Bill 27 in Alberta. Ultimately, advocacy is calculated and intentional. It is not to be used as a moral satisfaction or performative matter. Considering the state of trans politics in the world, it is so important that we advocate for trans rights because trans rights are human rights. I hope this episode shone light upon the jeopardy trans rights are in, how to practice mindful allyship and intentional advocacy. Learning the repercussions to trans-centered advocacy may have not entered your mind before this podcast, yet I am hopeful that there is now a little more knowledge circulated in order to change our world for the better. I've also provided some trans support groups and additional summary points. Thank you for listening.